So back to the whole DOMD thing. DO, it may be a little easier to get in. Still today, it is easier.
I mean, I believe so.
Yeah.
I applied about 6 years ago. I don't think
Right.
it's changed much. So I'm sure it's a little bit easier still.
But is there any restriction if you become a DO instead of an MD in terms of practicing medicine?
No,
Nothing whatsoever, right?
no.
You could become an orthopedic surgeon like you are. You could become a ER doctor. You could become a medical doctor. Doesn't make a difference.
Correct.
Yeah. What did you think of your schooling? Were you married when you went to school?
No, we were still boyfriend, girlfriend. We got engaged during third year med school.
So what was med school like for you? What were the hours like?
Well, I didn't go to class besides the required classes. I went maybe the first week and
Well, you're like the worst person to tell for young kids.
well, it's different because by
Right.
the time you get to med school, you know how to learn and how
Right.
you learn best, and you're there to succeed. You're not there to party and mess around anymore. So when you're serious at that point. So when you actually get to med school, about 50% of the class actually goes to class.
Right.
You know, half don't go. And so I went to class maybe the first week, and you sit there for 8 hours all day and listen
Right.
to lectures, and then you're expected to go home and study. But for my learning style is if I sit in a lecture and listen to someone talk, I start dazing off, and I don't get much out of a lecture for that long. An hour or so, sure, I could listen to someone, but I'm not going to sit there all day. I'll be off, pretend I'm on the beach or something somewhere. And so I would just learn to stay at home, get up, have some coffee, sit there and just study. And I would, print out all the PowerPoints ahead of time and then just read through them and write notes at the same time. I need to actively be learning by reading, writing, highlighting, doing stuff versus just listening. And then lectures are recorded as well. So you can go and, listen to the lecture. If you want to just sit there and listen to the whole lecture, you can listen to it at 1.5 speed or 2 times speed. Or if you're like me, I didn't really listen to the lectures. I would just go into them for like parts of the PowerPoint I didn't understand, or if there was a particular professor that I knew tested off of lecture material that wasn't on the PowerPoint, that I knew I would have to listen to it.
Right.
But I preferred to not listen to anyone and just do it on my own.
Because it's really just memorizing.
Correct. If the material's there, I would go over it. I could go over it twice before, like by the time a professor gave a lecture, that was my second time basically going over it.
Right.
So I was already ahead in that sense.
Right. How many hours a day do you think you spent in your first 2 years of med school? And that's the learning part, the book part.
Most of the day. Essentially, as soon as you get up, start studying. And then I would go to the gym for a couple hours, break it up, go to the workout, and then study the rest of the day. And,
Right.
Sit, you take a break or whatever to eat and stuff like that. But I would basically study until I went to bed, maybe turn the TV on for 30 minutes to an hour at the end of the night, kind of thing. So it's at 12 to 15 hours a day that you're sitting there
Really studying.
actually studying.
Right.
Maybe if you subtract a couple hours out of that whole day for the gym and doing some stuff. And I would do that essentially Monday through Friday. Saturday I would study, try to do a full day of studying. It kind of depends if I was with my girlfriend or not. And then most Sundays I took off. Maybe I'd study a couple hours in the morning, but I personally needed a day to kind of just not do anything and just
Clear your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is your wife in medicine too?
No, she's in banking.
Okay, so totally opposite world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said now in medical school, at the end of medical school, you guys started getting together?
Yeah, so
How'd she cope with the whole 15 hours a day of sitting, reading, and drinking excessive amounts of coffee?
Yeah. So I met her when I was applying to medical school in San Diego. So 6, 7, 8 months before or whatever, she actually went to a couple of my interviews, went on the trip with me to Arizona and stuff to go to the interview.
Right.
So she went through the whole process from, interview forward. But then I, came to Vegas to go to med school, and she stayed in San Diego at that point because we still only knew each other for 6 months to 8 months or whatever it was. So it wasn't like, oh, we're going to move to Vegas and we're getting married at this point right now.
Yeah.
So we did long distance, and I went back every other week or so. I was essentially almost in San Diego half the time my first 2 years because I didn't go to class, so I'd only come back for the classes I needed to go.
Right.
So I would go back to her apartment in San Diego. She'd go to work. I'd study all day and
Right.
work out there or whatever and just hang out. And then I'd hang out with her a little bit at night or on the weekends and things like that. And she was supportive. She'd actually, if I was screwing off or watching videos or something, she'd kind of yell at me, tell me to start studying.
Put you back in your place.
Yeah. So, and I think it helped having her versus being single here, because then I would have been apt to go out more with the
Right.
students and stuff and
Right.
party or go to that, do something versus kind of living a more relaxed lifestyle and watching a movie and maybe having some wine or a beer and something. But
When your wife sees us, that's a good way to put it. A more relaxed lifestyle.
Yeah.
Keep you out of trouble.
Yeah.
Now, were you older than most kids in your class because you took all that time off?
A few years, but that's the other thing. When I think the average age to start med school now is maybe 25, 26. I started at 27. I turned 28 in the first month or two of med school.
Right.
So I was a couple years older. One of my roommates, I started at 27, 28 essentially. He was maybe 24, 25, and the other one was younger, 22. So I was maybe a couple years younger or older, sorry, but most people were in that mid-20s range, so it wasn't drastically different in my school anyways.
So most people take some time off?
I feel like most people maybe take 1 to 2 years, kind of. Some of them do research, or they just take some time, at least in the osteopathic schools. And I think MDs as well, a fair amount of people do take a year off.
Try to find
so.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you take 5 years, you're going to be a little bit older, but
Right.
if you only take a couple, not so bad.
Right. How did it feel to go from having money and a career to all of a sudden being a student and having no income?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it kind of sucks, but
It's fun.
Yeah. You get very used to it. And for me, I'm actually happier now, even making a lot less as a resident or
Right.
even when I was a student than I was then.
You're just happier with what you're doing.
I'm happier what I'm doing. We still, we have an okay salary. It's not like we're starving.
Right.
So I have enough money to still, and especially where we live is not too costly in
Right.
Nevada. So I have enough money to still go travel, to eat out and things like that. It's like, I don't need $1 million house and a Ferrari or anything right now. I'm happy to
Right now.
You did say right now.
He did. You caught that. So yeah. So now you got through the first 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You did have to go to anatomy though, right? I mean, they make you go to class for anatomy.
Yeah,
no?
exactly. So the first year of med school, there's more required class. Second year, there's almost none besides our OMM or osteopathic manipulative medicine,
Okay.
maybe a couple of labs and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so first year, you still have anatomy twice a week. And then, there's some classes, but you
Right.
can still get out of town for 4 days at a time,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And then
Yeah.
second year, you can get out of town 5-6 days at a time. And so I would do that twice a month or so. Kinda.
Right.
And I would fly back to San Diego and study on the plane, study in the airport. So I was not wasting time driving. And
Right.
the flights are cheap to get back to San Diego, $30 to $70 each way.
And it's a short trip.
It's a
45-minute
yeah.
trip, and yeah, that's not bad. Was there any class that you really kind of hated, that you struggled with in those first 2 years that you wish you would have done differently? Or
Microbiology, I hated.
yeah,
It was just pure memorization. Some of the other classes, they're all memorization, most of them, but there's some of it you can actually still have concepts to learn, like pathology and biochemistry.
so pathology is a study of disease.
Yeah.
So you're looking at tumors, cancers, things like that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
most things in the body, there's a at least a reason or a path of why it's happening, some sort of mechanism.
Right.
So it's not just pure memorization. But yeah, microbiology seemed like it was just
remembering all those bugs,
bugs.
and protozoa things and worms and I hated that too. Absolutely hated it.
And you couldn't see them, so there's nothing to grasp. You're memorizing something that you have to look at with a microscope. So I thought it was just
pretty painful.
Yeah,
that was pretty painful. I remember that too. So although now look, it's the bugs that are killing us. COVID, right? I'm glad somebody knows about them. I'm glad it's not me.
Yeah, someone went into infectious disease.
So you go through your first 2 years, and then now you start hitting rotations. And in osteopathic school, you were explaining to me that it works a little differently than MD school, because in MD school the programs are bigger, so there's a different way that you try to get into your next level, which is called residency, or internship becomes residency. So explain that, and then where'd you go? How'd you decide where you were going to apply to, and what pathway you were going to take?
Sure. So in third year med school, you essentially have all your required core rotations you have to do: family medicine, internal medicine, general surgery.
So where'd you do your general surgery?
In town here. It was just with local general surgeons.
Yep.
So it wasn't through a lot of the people. Some people, go to the different residency programs, Mountain View and UMC and things. But
did you find the general surgery capture you, or is it totally different for you than orthopedics?
Well, the way my schedule was set up is my orthopedics was at the very end of the year, and I got more and more surgery as time went on. So I went OB-GYN, then general surgery, then orthopedics.
Okay.
And once I got into OB-GYN, the guy I worked with mostly, he did a lot of hysterectomies, robotic surgeries, and stuff like that. And so being in the OR, I was like, wow, this is actually really cool. Like, I am enjoying this.
Being in the operating
room. It was more fun than family medicine or internal medicine, where you're just, doing rounds. You're not in the OR.
Well, they're definitely, and Rich and I were talking about this last week. The OR is a culture on itself, and you have to like that culture, which is very different than family practice or ER. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
You too, Rich?
No, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now you're going through your rotations, and you start getting into orthopedics, and you get to pick where you're going to do your orthopedics?
Essentially. So as time went on from OB-GYN to general surgery, I was like, oh, this is cool. I like it. And then you get to orthopedics, go, this is awesome. And you look back at OB-GYN and go, there's no way I would ever done that. How did I even like it?
Isn't that funny?
It was just being in the OR, the culture, like you said.
The culture, yeah.
And then for fourth year med school, at least in the osteopathic world, is you spend the first 4 or 5 months or so rotating at programs that you want to do residency at. Right. Especially in orthopedics. Some of the other fields, not so much. Family medicine, you might do an away rotation at a program you want to go to, a couple of programs, but in the very, very competitive fields like orthopedics and ENT, neurosurgery, things like that, you basically need to go to a program and be there for a month, where it's like being on an interview, kind of. They're getting to know you. They want to see if they can work with you. And so you have... Every school is different, but our school allowed about 5 months of elective rotations at the beginning of your fourth year, where you could go to different programs and show your face and, show your personality and skill. And that's where it becomes difficult, because you kind of have to decide where you're going to go. In the DO orthopedic world, there's around 40 programs or so. And if you can only go to, if you have 5 months, how I did it was I did 4-week rotations. So that was 4 programs for 4 weeks. And then I picked 2 other programs. Or no, I picked one. What did I do? I think I picked one other program for an additional 2 weeks or something like, I don't know, maybe something like that. I had a 1 2-week program and 4 or 5 other programs. 5 4-weekers and 1 2-week. And that added up to the amount of time I was allowed to do. Right. And so you kind of have to decide which program are you going to go to for 2 weeks, and what ones are you going to 4 weeks, and where in the country are you going to go. And for me, I actually went more based on stats in a sense. I looked at programs, looked at their board scores based on how my board scores were.
Well, when do you take the boards?
So there's a first level 1 boards, or step 1 is at the end of second year.
Okay.
And that's basically the biggest, most important one that they kind of weight.
That's like well, now it's computer, right? It's not writing anymore.
Yeah, it's on the computer.
But it's just brain work. How much you know from the first
2 years of med school, correct?
Right.
And it's kind of like taking the SAT or the MCAT. It's just another factor that puts everyone on the same level playing field. How else do you weigh someone that went to another school to you? So that's weighted pretty heavily.
Do you remember taking it?
Yeah, I was pretty nervous for it just because I knew the pressure going into it. Yeah, and it's
shaking
long,
in your boots.
Yeah, and it's the longest test I've taken at that point. It's an 8-hour exam.
Right.
So
do you think you studied for it? Right.
Yeah, relatively.
How long did you have to study for it?
We had about a month or so off. They give you a little bit of a break where
full month. You just all day long, all night long study. 15 hours a day, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Again?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a petrifying test to take.
Yeah.
Your whole life, you hear you're a professional, you want to go into this, and this one test, 8 hours, is the barrier between you going over the hurdle and becoming what you want to be. So I certainly remember that as well. Okay, so you take the test, and how'd you do?
I did average.
Okay.
Yeah. My score, my scores weren't very, very high for orthopedics.
Okay.
Because orthopedics is so competitive, high scores. I was, okay scores, but
how competitive is orthopedics? I mean, is it like there's one spot for 200 people?
I don't know what the number. I think there's maybe 100 something DO spots in the nation total.
100 only.
150, something like that.
Yeah.
We'd have to look it up, but
a DO cannot go to an MD program?
They can.
They can.
Yeah.
And does an MD go to a DO program?
Now they can.
Okay.
2 years ago, no.
Okay, but now they do.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of opening up.
Yeah.
Is that an advantage for DO, or is that an advantage for an MD that this has changed?
So that's the whole thing. Depends kind of how you look at it. Previously, 2 years ago, DOs had a safety net where they had only their programs. No one else could touch their programs, and they could still apply to the MD programs.
Right.
Except it was kind of complicated because there's 2 matches. The DO match was about a month or so before the MD match. So you can apply the DO match, and if you get a spot, you can't back out of that spot.
Right.
But if you want to go for the MD, you have to forego the DO match and shoot for the MD. So you skip out on a DO where you probably could have gotten a spot. You go for the MD, you hope you get it, but if you don't get it, then all of a sudden you don't have a spot.
Well, then you're screwed.
So then you're screwed.
Jeez, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah,
I think I'd take the DO spot.
Yeah, so it depends it's very complex based on what your scores look like and what field you're going into and things like that. In the orthopedic world, not many people could get into a MD program because it's so competitive on the MD side.
Right.
But for something
it's also as competitive, like they were different schools.
Yeah.
They had head-to-head battles,
Yeah.
right? Which is changing now. But
now it's changing. So now it's one match. It's all one MD match.
Okay.
So we're all on the same day in March, when it used to be February for DO and March for MD. So now we're all in March, and now DOs can apply to the MDs, and MDs can now apply to the DOs. And so I personally, I don't think there's going to be a lot of change initially in these first few years. I think the programs that are DO based are mainly going to take DO people, and then the MD programs are not all of a sudden going to open up their doors wide open to the DOs. The ones that previously took DOs are probably still going to take DOs. The ones that never took DOs are not going to all of a sudden take a bunch of DOs, but maybe in 5-10 years that maybe will start to change. I don't know.
Would you agree a lot of getting into residency isn't just how smart you are, because once you make it into medical school, everybody knows you're smart. You were able to do it, and especially once you pass your boards. But it's a personality thing that, again, it becomes a subculture that you have to like each other. You're going to spend 5 years with a group of people. You got to become friends. You become a family. And I think a lot of times what happens is a program will start taking people from a school, and that school, somebody goes up and then the next person goes because they know each other, and it becomes like almost like a chain reaction.
Correct.
Is that what happens with DO programs?
I think so, to some degree.
Yeah.
You definitely see people that pick places to rotate based on where residents or people from their school are now residents. And
Right.
I go, okay, he's there. He went to my school, so they must take people from my school.
Right.
And things like that.
So how'd you pick the programs that you went to rotate, those 5 programs?
So that like, I actually looked at each program, looked at scores based on how, you know, level 1 or step 1 scores were. And then I looked at how many people, because you can get these numbers, how many people they auditioned. You know, did they audition 30 people? Did they audition 50 people? And then how many spots do they have? And then that way I can predict, or at least put the stats in my favor. I go to a place that has 2 or 3, they take 2 or 3 people, residents, but they only audition 20 to 25. So I stand a better chance getting into that program than I do go into a program where they audition 50 plus people and they only take 2 people.
So you actually used a strategic method. You didn't just say, I want to be in California. You actually said, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Let me figure out mathematically what's my best chance.
I did that.
As the engineer in it.
Yeah, I did that as well as pinpoint down when they interview, because you can look up past year interviews, so you kind of have an idea. So some of the Midwest programs tend to interview in mid-October or so to early November, while a lot of the West Coast programs were late November, December. So if I strategically ended up in a program in August, September, early October, I was right before the interview. They would remember me well, and then I did West Coast late, where they'd remember me more. So
that's an interesting strategy. So you actually think about this from a mathematical standpoint.
I did, but I wanted orthopedics that bad that I needed to look at every way to get into it.
Yep. Do you think there's strategy like that to get into med school? Like,
no.
Again, you did a different approach because you were older, you were more mature in a way, and so you had your story. But a young kid, do you think there's a strategy to get in, that he should go to a specific school based on that he has a better chance of getting into a med school?
Go to a better undergrad to get into a
or
a better
maybe,
med school to get into a better residency.
Yeah, like all of that. Do you think there's a mathematical pathway to be smarter to get in?
I think so. Med school, it's a rolling admission, and you're best to start. It's over a year, I believe, a little over a year. Get it in get your apps in as soon as possible. So that way, when you get there's a secondary application with more essays you have to fill out, and then interviews. The earlier you get it in, the earlier you're going to get an interview. So I think the chances of getting into a school's higher. As the time goes on, there's less spots available, so there's less of a chance to get in.
Interesting.
And then in terms of picking schools, where to go, that's a whole factor too. That's like, sometimes it's best to say to go to the cheapest school so you don't have a lot of debt. And then there's that, depending on your personal situation, if you can get to a really good school, but maybe it's a private school that costs a lot versus a state school that's not. But regardless, I think it does matter to some degree where you go, because if you can get into a big name MD school, it's going to open doors that a smaller DO school is not necessarily.
Do you really think so?
It's not going to shut you out, but it's going to be much harder to get into a big name residency or fellowship just because you don't have the connections, essentially.
It's interesting, Keith. I guess you're right. Connections are different. And before we started this, we were talking about my connections, how I got in. I went on a rotation and I met a fellow, which is a guy who already finished residency. Now he's doing a subspecialty. He called his old residency director. So he had nothing to do at this point with where he trained, but he called the guy who was the head of the residency where I ended up going, and he called him up and said he liked me, and that's how I got in. So it was the connection. But I always find it funny when, like, these anesthesiologists, which I work with a lot of them, like one went to Hopkins, which is a phenomenal school, but he's in the same operating room with me in the OR, and and his debt is huge. And
Yeah, that's true. At the very end of the day, I don't think it matters at all.
Right.
But if you do want to end up as an academic in an academic institution somewhere, you essentially, at some path, need to end up in fellowship at a big academic program, I would imagine. But if you don't care about that, most guys end up in a community-based hospital anyways. None of it really matters. But I'm saying in terms of getting into a bigger name fellowship or
Right.
residency.
Right.
It all starts earlier on. The bigger undergrad school,
You
the
get into-
higher connections for, I think, getting into a higher name med school, into a higher name residency. But at the very end of the day, it doesn't matter. You all potentially, can make the same amount of money. You can, go into a different style of practice based on what you want to do, whether it's private practice or you want to work in a hospital and things like that. I don't think any of it really matters. But granted, I'm not as far as you either, so I haven't been to the applying for jobs and things like that.
Oh, you're going to have no problem whatsoever. You're going to be exactly where I am.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind. You're going to be exactly where I am. You're going to finish your residency. You're going to get a great fellowship, and you're going to go out and practice and do whatever you choose.
Think I might be over my troubles since you came around. Something struck me. Oh, lately I've been caught up in my mind.